I remade my own version of Point Insertion from Half-Life 2 in 1 month. And as promised, I'm going to give you a breakdown on how I did it. Now, I'll preface this by saying that I was fairly balls to the wall on this for that time, but I definitely worked the way that made it easier, and I'm going to share that with you all in this video. So firstly, we start with reference gathering. Making a big playable scene is a lot like building a house, really. Before you do anything else, you start by doing your homework. You get your papers and permits sorted so you don't end up in trouble when you actually start building the thing. Now, I knew Point Insertion was somewhat based off a station in Budapest called Nugati Railway Station, so I went and researched it. My favourite way to gather references through walking tours and urban exploration videos. To all the urbex and walking tour YouTubers, you've literally no idea how many video games you've influenced. Trust me, on Call of Duty, I'd look at these all the time before starting to make levels, and so would a lot of other people. They just give you real-world perspective and scale reference far better than anything else out there. Just being in the space and moving around it is much better than viewing it from the perspective of photographs. But that said, I also threw in a few images from general internet searching to fill in the gaps. The most important part of reference gathering is to not mix and match too much. Keep it focused and always have a key reference image or location that you don't stray too far from. I like to see reference gathering as zooming through the levels of a microscope. I start with the lowest zoom level, the key reference, and then just gradually zoom in, from gathering the prop reference all the way down to gathering that really fine material reference. PureRef is my go-to tool for creating reference boards, just in case you're wondering. Just go download it, it'll literally change your life if you've not used it before. And then the Blockout. Or not. I'll just say this right away. I didn't do a blockout for this scene. But that said, blocking out scenes is a really important stage of creating environments, don't get me wrong. It helps you to prove out scale, develop strong visual and gameplay composition, highlights potential problems early, and allows you to identify what assets you need. But when I'm doing personal work, I often know exactly what I want to make already in my mind. And I'm doing it for fun for myself, not anyone else. Also, I had heaps of real-world reference and in-game reference, which they all included human scale in them already. On top of that, I've already made quite a lot of levels like this already, so generally, I have a good instinct for what I need to do, and that was the case here. I'd just be blocking out for the sake of it, and I literally had no time to waste on this. As a quick story here for context, I live in Los Angeles, and I started this project just before I flew back to England for Christmas. I spent 3 weeks working on this project on a single 15-inch laptop screen, sat at my parents' dining table, and my neck and spine had turned to dust by the time I flew back. But I persevered, and it taught me you don't actually need all the equipment in the world to make something cool. Anyway, get the tiny violin out. Moving on. After this, it was all about the art blockout. We all know I skipped the blockout. I just wanted to go straight into the fun stuff. Art blockout is essentially where you create the rudimentary versions of all the assets and get almost everything you can into Engine in a pretty crude form. So as you update and texture your assets, everything updates at once. By doing this early and often, you can quickly see what assets you're missing too. I started off by creating my basic modular blocks kit, which is essentially a kit of various size cubes that I use to build out any basic shapes like the floors and walls. As well as this, I made a modular corner piece I could float over the harsh edges to break up the silhouette of the columns and the walls and remove the harsh edge where needed. This allowed me to keep the basic kit piece as simple cubes and only add the corner detail where I needed it in Engine. Then I created all my trim pieces, brackets and metal beams and columns. To maintain flexibility and maximise the power of instancing, I created various lengths and sizes of all these assets that I could use to create any length or shape of beam, trim or bracket I wanted. Mostly that meant making 25, 50 and 100 centimetre and sometimes larger lengths of each asset, and then a corner piece where needed. Working this way is good for performance because it leverages instancing to its full potential, and more importantly for us artists, it gives you options and flexibility in Engine via kit bashing without having to model unique props all the time, which takes you out of the engine, which is where all the work's done. And I do this for everything, pretty much. I ensure I have a versatile kit of base assets that I can kit bash into anything I need. Now, it's just a case of building out the scene with these kit pieces. To do this, I work with prefabs, specifically packed level actors, or PLAs. Modularity should occur in Engine far more than it does in your modeling software. Working modular is all about building repeatable systems and sharing and reusing assets as much as possible. Take your smaller modular props and build up the bigger pieces you need as prefabs in Engine, then duplicate those around. It's a huge performance and time saver. I did this for everything from the walls to the windows to the platforms and the train tracks. It allowed me to quickly speed through building the station, and the best part of working this way is if I need to edit something, all I need to do was generally, at most, edit a couple prefabs. Then all my changes will just propagate everywhere. Now, usually people assume the mandatory workflow for creating assets and levels is to make the models first and then texture them. And that's sometimes fine, but I knew with the scale I was working at, I needed to adopt one of my favourite workflows, creating tiling, texture and trim sheets first, then model and texture my assets simultaneously. Trim sheets are a hybrid of unique and tiling textures. Think of them as ribbons of texture. You can make a piece of ribbon as long or as short as you want. You can stretch out a length of ribbon, cut that ribbon up into whatever shape you want, stack them on top of each other, or stick different pieces together to create nearly anything. I made these trim sheets by creating really simple high polys in Maya and baking them down to a plane, adding color ID masks so I could easily mask out areas of trim sheet while texturing. I used Substance Painter's library of materials for the texturing and just layered details together until I got to a point where I thought the textures looked cool. On top of being great in terms of time and performance efficiency, trim sheets are great for ensuring sharp, crisp textures on big objects. Check out this train. I often see large assets like this with 8 unique 2 to 4K texture maps, but here I've just got one trim sheet for each color scheme and one for the interior. Working like this and creating my textures first gives me a few advantages. Number one, it allows me to share textures between many assets and get creative with maximizing their reuse, which is good for performance and memory. Number two, it creates consistency between assets. Consistency of detail, materials, and style is the single most important thing to great game art. Sharing materials makes that borderline automatic. And number three, speed. Trim sheets have the texture detail needed already baked in, so all I need to do is model and unwrap. Here's the train interior as an example. I broke this wall down into panels. Then I would unwrap the panels, and within literally 30 minutes, thanks to the power of modularity, I had the interior walls of the entire train done. I could then take these panels and duplicate them around to build the other components of the interior. So I looked at the assets I need to make, and I made trim sheets based on that. Once those were done, I went on to modeling and texturing. When I'm deciding how to break down my modular kits, I look for two things: repeating elements and how the thing I want to make was constructed. Making things based on how they'd be constructed not only gives you a great starting point for knowing how to break down your modular kits, but it also allows you to quickly derive other models from larger ones. For example, making this railway track kit as it would be constructed allows me to extract the rails and the brackets and the sleepers as standalone meshes from the main kit piece to quickly add variety in Engine without making new big pieces. Let's break that workflow down quickly, using this fence as an example. A lot of people make fences by having a pole and a fence piece attached together as one piece, then a single pole to cap it off. In reality, fences aren't made like that. Here's how I do it. I know the poles are their own object, so I make a base pole. From research, I can work out the fences put on after and held together by the tension between the poles. Because I've worked out how it's constructed and made my fence textures first, I can take my alpha mass chain link and realistically attach it to the tensioning pole thing, like so. This means I make the fence realistically and it snaps together with the poles. I've got authenticity and modularity all in one. So that gives me the base straight fence section, but I need corners and end caps and a gate. However, because I've made the base pole, all I need to do is grab the brackets and rotate them 90 degrees. Boom, I've got a corner. And the end piece, all I need to do is delete one side. To make the gate, all I need to do is extract the fencing piece I've already made, textured, and kit bash them together. Now, my pivots are all in the same location, so I can snap everything together quickly. I can also easily rotate and add wobble to long stretches of fence like this in Engine. But I also wanted barbed wire. So I just modeled the barbed wire attachments that can fit on top of the base pole and ensure it all snaps together. I'd already made the barbed wire trim texture. All I need to do is unwrap the strip of geometry and it's done. And I thought I'd make a base for good measure, so the fence realistically attaches to the ground. Again, using the same textures as the fence. And this is a mindset I adopt for everything I make. It's a little more work up front, but it's a lot of gain down the line. And from here on, essentially I just go through my scene like a checklist. As I go, I get better and quicker at using my trim sheets and tiling textures, and the progress just becomes parabolic. Here's a few good ones for you. I use the same rubber that I used on the trolley cart on the train floor. I use the metal for all the fencing, the turnstile, and even the railings in the trains. I use the same iron trim for all the painted metalwork in the entire scene, from the bolts and brackets to the giant beams and columns. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. Greta Thunberg would be so proud of how much I've reused, repurposed, and recycled in this scene. So now, it's time for the finishing touches. I was left with a scene that was cool, but the tiling look was very apparent. That's one of the visual downsides of working this way. You end up with a lot of repetition, and that needs fixing at the end. That's where adding decals and all the smaller props comes in. I use these assets to break up all the tiling detail and add uniqueness and bits of interest and story to the key areas of the scene. When I'm doing this type of set dressing, I like to create islands of detail. I imagine what would happen in the space in reality, and then set dressed based on that imagination. A lot of people think environmental storytelling is about crowbarring a literal forced story into a space and calling it a day. It's not. It's about imagining what happened in your space leading up to the exact moment you're showing and putting all that history into your work. Now that could be a human story or a natural one. The point is the world is changing second to second, both on its own and through people interacting with it. Everything is how it is for a reason. Understanding that and capturing it in-game is the key to creating believable worlds. Life happens first, then you set dress based on that. Treat the staining, cracks, leaks, dirt, and overgrowth as stories just as much as the human ones you put into your spaces. Environmental storytelling is about making your worlds feel right, not just look good. And then it was just about creating the video. So I started out in the industry as a cinematics artist, and whilst it's been a while, I still have a decent understanding of creating videos and using sequencer, which is what I use to animate everything in this scene. I'm not going to go into how I brought the characters into the scene in detail, since these aren't my assets, they're Valve's. But loosely, I got the character assets, I added more geometry to them in Maya, I up-res the textures, then reworked those textures in Painter by adding additional detail. For example, I used an ambient occlusion mask to add wrinkles and folds to the clothes. I created new roughness and normal maps too. Then I rigged them up using a tool called AccuRig and bought some animations to use as well. After I had all that, it was just a case of bringing everything into the level and creating the cinematic. So I defined the path I was going to follow for the video quite early on and timed all the key beats based on that in sequencer. The opening train sequence was a little trickier to make. To achieve it, I created a level instance of the train carriage with all my set dressing inside it. Then I animated that moving along the track. After that, outside the train carriage level, I created an invisible cube and parented all the interior lighting, decals, characters, and the camera to that. And I ensured it had the same pivot as the train. Then I made the cube perform the same movement as the train, so everything just lined up. This is how I made the seamless transition from the camera move at the start of the scene into the player camera. By the way, I made the opening camera effect by keyframing the gain, chromatic aberration, and film grain to create the effect. And that was the same deal for the scanner flash. That's it. If you have any questions, let me know down below, and I'll be more than happy to answer anything you want to know. I'm not about gatekeeping knowledge. I believe that sharing knowledge is the key to getting a better games industry and better games as a result. But anyway, that's that. That's how I made this entire scene in 1 month. Pretty easy, right? Whilst I would love to, and probably will revisit the Half-Life universe again, for now, I've got other plans. I think it's time to make a stylized piece in my next video. But without further ado, I'll leave you with the final product. See you in the next one. Peace.
Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman. Rise and shine.
I didn't see you get on. No matter how many times I've been relocated, I didn't get used to it. Well, end of the line.
Welcome. Welcome to City 17. You have chosen or been chosen to relocate to one of our finest remaining urban centers. I thought so much of City 17 that I elected to establish my administration here in the citadel so thoughtfully provided by our benefactors. I've been proud to call City 17 my home. And so, whether you are here to stay or passing through on your way to parts unknown, welcome to City 17. It's safer here.